Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Hilliard MacBeth, author of the second edition of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. He's also a portfolio manager and financial advisor in Edmonton. Welcome back to the show, Hilliard.
It's always a pleasure to be on your show.
Hilliard, stock markets again in record territory. Who's higher? And that includes the TSX. It's not just in New York.
Yeah, there's different reasons for New York versus now there is one market in the world, China, which is way down this year, surprisingly weak, but we can talk about that in a minute. But the ones that are hitting new highs are NASDAQ, the S&P 500, Toronto, for different reasons. Toronto is a rally in the oil stocks and other things like that. But the tech growth story in the U.S. Has pushed the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 to record highs again. Not huge new highs. I mean, they're a little bit above where they were before, but not substantially. But what's happening is the earnings estimates keep getting adjusted higher, and the speculators are willing to pay a higher price earnings multiple. But it's the highest price earnings multiple on forward earnings in maybe forever. And on many measures, it's a much more expensive market than it was in 2000, for example. So, versus the gap between the high-flying stocks and the average stock is the widest, much wider than it was in 2000. So, which is interesting because the gap was pretty wide in 2000. So, there's a lot of things going on in the market that indicate that speculative activity has taken over the stock market. And then you can also look at things like Bitcoin is back up to 50,000, and these NFTs, these tokens. I'm not even sure what that is exactly. That's another sign of speculative bubbles. The SPAC, the special purpose acquisition vehicles, that's a sign of speculation, because the stock market and Wall Street and Bay Street in Toronto and London, they will always come up with something that satisfies the urge to speculate. And they to some extent they kind of got a little bit caught out of it when Bitcoin came along and the other coins. But they've retaliated. They've fought back, and they've got lots of speculative options. So, and the difference really with speculation is people are betting on the future price in a week or a day or an hour or 3 weeks, whereas investors are happy to hold an investment that pays an income for a long time. So it's the investment activity is dwindled to minimal, and the speculative activity is completely taken over the market.
When you hit a point like that, I see Visa bought a $150,000 non-fungible token of some kind. Even the credit card companies are getting in on it. I don't know if they use their own credit card to buy it. I think Visa might be a little smarter than that. But does it just show they have so much cash sloshing around? They're desperate to find some place for it. They've snapped up all the Michael Jordan running shoes they could find, I guess. So now somebody puts a picture on a digital database and people buy it.
Well, I saw a thing yesterday that said that you can buy a diamond or you can get a non-fungible token that represents ownership of the diamond. So now you've got two things that you can enjoy. You can enjoy the NFT and you can enjoy the diamond itself. And you can separate them apparently. That part I don't understand. I guess you could have possession of the diamond, but somebody else owns the non-fungible token, so therefore they could demand that you give them the diamond at some time. I don't know exactly how that works, but it's pretty bizarre.
Or you just can't take pictures of the diamond.
Oh, I don't know. It's that might be a third version of it, the online version of the diamond. So you got the diamond real, then you got the NFT, and then you got the right to show it on Instagram. Hey, there's a new idea. We can invent a new entity. But it's all signs of, and I think we're getting close to the top of this thing. It's been like this year, actually since COVID, it's been absolutely phenomenal. I mean, the ability of the market to overcome things like, of course, the advent of COVID in March of 2020. The big sell-off lasted a month, and that was it. And of course, lots of government programs. Now we're looking at the ending of the government programs, and the market seems to be handling that quite well. And it's just. And now we're looking at there's a Federal Reserve. There's something they call the Jackson Hole meeting, which is a bunch of central bankers getting together, and they're talking about announcing the end of the most permissive monetary policy ever in the history of monetary policy. And the market seems to be handling that quite well. And then there's a Delta variant comes along, and the market seems to handle that okay. So what is it that the market, what would it be that the market wouldn't be able to handle? What's the next thing that's coming that the market can't handle? Because there's always something that comes along. And sometimes we don't even know what it is. After the fact, even, we can't really identify what it is. There's just one day everybody wakes up and says, hey, this speculation is crazy. I'm getting out. I've had enough. I don't know when that day comes, but I don't think it's far off.
Well, we have a record amount of money borrowed on margin. At some point, that's got to start to drag down the market where people just can't sustain that debt. Is that going to be a factor this time around?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of upset people because I checked the advertising for online trading platforms like Robinhood, and they don't mention they within 1 hour you can be set up with a margin account and an options trading account, but they don't mention in there that the margin loans are callable. And I think a lot of people, people running Robinhood might not even know that how callable they are, because if you read the fine print of the agreement, it says that the loan can be called at any time, not at the end of the day, and not with everybody usually gets some notice. We want you to deposit some more money in your account because you're under margin. But it's not a legal requirement that they give you any notice. It's your responsibility to keep the margin in the account. And if you let it go under, they can sell, and that it has to be that way, because the banks that lend the brokerage firms money on call could call the loans anytime, and therefore the brokerage firms have to be able to call the loans that the clients have at any time. So there's going to be some very upset people when they find out what a margin call really is like. So it's like there's probably not that many people around that have ever had a margin call, and of course it's never one person that gets a margin call. It's a whole bunch of people that get a margin call, and probably in this case, because it's so widespread, the government probably will get involved in all kinds of stuff. And I know in 1987, when the market went down 20% one day, and then the next day, that was a Monday, and then the next day, the market was down even further. And Alan Greenspan, the chair of the Federal Reserve, called all of the New York banks that lend money to the New York stockbrokers companies and said, lend money freely, don't call any margin calls, lend more money into the market. And the market turned around and went back up again. So maybe the margin call would be short-lived, because that eventually became called the Greenspan put. And it was a big factor in allowing speculators to be confident that nobody's going to pull the rug out from under them ever. But at some point, perhaps it will happen. Maybe there will be a margin call, and that would be the end of the speculative market for sure.
We'll have more with Hilliard MacBeth right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Hilliard MacBeth. Hilliard, we're in the middle of a federal election campaign, affordable housing, one of the major issues. Is there anything the politicians should be offering us right now that would make housing more affordable?
Well, the only thing that's going to make housing more affordable is if house prices go down. And no somebody running for re-election is going to want to have that happen. I mean, there's a bunch of people There's young people that would like prices to be lower so they could buy a house, but most of the voters already own a house in Canada. The ownership rate in Canada is very high. It's like 70%. It's one of the highest in the OECD countries. And most of the people that own houses are older, and older people vote more often than younger people. So no politician is going to take the side of the younger people who don't have a house yet over the older people who already have a house. So it's guaranteed loss of election if you have a housing correction, not even a crash, but a correction of 20% or more before an election. So you're not ever going to see anybody really address the issue. So what they do is they tinker around the edges. So this morning what came out was a TFSA for homeowners. I didn't even understand the details, and a ban on foreign buying for 2 years. So no foreigners will be allowed to buy houses for 2 years. But of course, it doesn't take effect until sometime in the future. I don't know. I forget. I didn't notice what the date was. So if there's a bunch of foreign buyers that want to buy, then they'll be buying before then. So, but those things never work. The only thing that would really work, well, we require two things. The first of all is a correction in house prices. And the second, related, would be for the banks to tighten up on the availability of credit. So you'd have to have a situation where the bank said, you know what, the maximum we're going to lend is, well, it should really be 3 times, but that would be too ridiculous. 3 times income. The average house now is about 8 times income. So they'd have to start at something like 5 times income. They say, okay, the maximum we're going to lend is 5 times income. And then the house prices would have to come down because almost all homes are bought with borrowed money. Most of it borrowed from the banks. So there would be probably little chance that the banks would do that. And eventually get it down to 3 or 4 times income, which used to be, before this bubble started, that used to be the top of what people paid for housing, was 3 to 4 times income. And it's entirely dependent on how much the lenders are willing to lend. I said the banks, but there are other lenders besides the banks. So the government could put in rules and say, the maximum you can lend these people is, if they have combined income of 100,000, the max you can lend them is 400,000. Maybe start at 500 and then say eventually it'll go to 400. And house prices magically would come down to that level or close to it.
One of the parties has suggested a 20% foreign buyer tax. But in reality, foreign buyers, I don't think, have been a big factor in Canadian real estate since 2017.
Yeah, the big boom, there was one of the reports on the money laundering in Vancouver said $16 billion came in 1 year. I think it was 2016 or 2017. And it's dried up since then. But those people don't care about a tax. They're either laundering illegal money or they're just desperate to get their money out of whatever country they're in because they're afraid the government's going to seize their money. So they'll willingly pay the tax, and they don't even care if they lose money on if they buy a $5 million house in West Van and eventually it goes to $4 million. They don't care. At least they got $4 million laundered, right? And that's the main thing. So no, but most of the market is driven by Canadian people working in jobs and going usually to the bank or to a mortgage broker and arranging a loan. And the loan is right now is massive, and the house prices right now are at double levels. So unless the bubble keeps going forever, which I argue is impossible, but that's yet to be proven true, then there's going to be a lot of upset people because there's going to be a lot of debt that's potentially defaulted on, or at least, imagine buying a house at $1 million, and not a great house, just sort of an average house in Vancouver or Toronto at $1 million with $900,000 debt, and the price drops to $600,000. Here you are paying a loan of $900,000 for the next 25, 30 years on a $600,000 house. It's not a very good situation. So it's not a good situation for the lender or for the homeowner.
Now, taking a look at what's happening in Canadian real estate right now, do we have hot markets or the market's cooling off? And are there areas that are surprising? Well,
it's hard to tell. Things are moving so fast. We do know that, because the numbers came out recently, that in July, I think it was, the year-over-year increase in mortgage debt in Canada was something like 17%, and the month-to-month increase was equivalent of close to 20% increase. So we know that a couple of months ago, anyway, the housing buying was extremely active, and people were borrowing a lot of money, a lot more because when you see those numbers, it's quite amazing. So Canada has maybe the highest household debt in the world, or it's second highest. We're in the top 2 or 3 anyway. And then to see an increase of 20%. So the way that's measured is it's a ratio between the household debt and the GDP of the economy. So the GDP of the economy is going to go up maybe 3-4% or whatever. Went down a little bit in 2020 because of COVID. Will be up this year. So if mortgage debt goes up 17% or something like that, the ratio increases dramatically. So we'd shoot up from number 2 to number 1. Australia and a couple other countries like that are I think we're ahead of Australia, but we're right up there with the best of them. And anytime any country's gotten into that amount of mortgage debt, there's been a financial crisis shortly afterwards, which is what's the other thing that's amazing about this Canadian situation is not only is the debt increasing at close to 20% annually in this basically weak economy that we have because of COVID, but it's from a very, very high level. So it's just one of those things that would result in a very bad outcome. The other countries that were mentioned going back 5 or 10 years as potential financial crisis companies would be China, and there's a big real estate company called Evergrande in China that does residential property that is in the news a lot right now of being unable to pay their debts, in Hong Kong and Australia. So those are the 4: Canada, Australia, Hong Kong, and China are the four ones that have the most dangerous situation right now.
I just saw a report that Canadians are paying off personal debt at the highest rate since the 1980s. Are they paying off this debt, say, for credit cards? Because you can't really travel right now. So if you have some money sitting around, why not pay down debt?
Yeah, you wonder if the mortgage debt is going up that fast. I suspect that what's happening is the people that are issuing the mortgages are saying, you know what, why don't we give you a little extra money on your mortgage so you can pay off that personal debt that you have? Because, the interest rate on that personal debt is much higher than the mortgage is 1.5%. So why wouldn't you take that credit card debt, which is 18 or 19%, and roll it into the mortgage debt? So I suspect that's what's happening. And as you say, it's really hard to travel right now. It's still really hard to travel. You can't buy a new car. There just aren't any available. So those are the 3 big things. So people basically maybe are finding that and the government support doesn't actually expire until just shortly after the election itself. So they've got that government support money coming in. So it's a situation where maybe the credit card is going cold. It's not. They're not able to heat it up on anything like they would normally do. Maybe going to restaurants and stuff like that is not that common right now either. So. Yeah, it's a very unusual time. And interest rates at 1.5%, record growth in mortgage debt. Who would have thought that could possibly be happening at a time when without the government support that we got last year and continuing into this year, there would have been a pretty massive recession, / depression. So.
Well, isn't there a moratorium on foreclosing on mortgages, or that just ended lately? Because one of the sources of affordable housing has been foreclosed homes, and we didn't have any for a year.
I talk to people, I don't know about individual homes. There just isn't really much going on in that. And with prices going up that fast, maybe if somebody gets into trouble with a loss of job or a divorce or something, they just sell the home rather than have to go into foreclosure. But I think also the banks were told, and I don't have any proof of this, so this is just me. I have seen other people say it. I'm not the only one saying it, but there's no way to know for sure because the discussions would be completely confidential. Between the government and CMHC and the regulator, which is called OSFI, Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, it would seem pretty clear that it's likely that there was a discussion that say, hey, go easy, don't foreclose, just take it easy, give people a chance to get back on their feet again. And everybody's wondering about this election that we're having, right now and the reason for calling it. And there doesn't seem to be, nobody seems to have come up with a good reason for calling it. But obviously if the banks are getting antsy, the banks could, with businesses especially, they can go on for quite a long time allowing the current owner of the business to operate the business, even though the debt is much larger than the value of the business. You say, well, we don't want to own a business as a bank, so you guys keep running it, and just let us know, make sure, let us know what's happening and stuff like that. Well, that only lasts for so long because the owner of the business knows that eventually the bank's going to seize the business. She has no way of getting the business back on its feet enough to pay back the bank loan. So the temptation is to start taking a few liberties with some of the money that's flowing through the business, right? So, and that's why the banks have to foreclose eventually, or trigger bankruptcy, or trigger there's different versions of bankruptcy, because the human temptation is to take advantage of a situation where you're in charge of the money, and it's not really your money anymore; it's the bank's money now. So they do have to eventually get tough with the borrowers, but they haven't yet. And whether it's just the banks don't want to for some reason, or whether they've been told, maybe go easy for now, I would guess it's probably both are true. That they've been told, and also they don't really want to have a big foreclosure crisis, but they can't put it off forever.
Tesla held their annual artificial intelligence event. What was the big story there? So
the story was that Tesla's been working on this artificial intelligence chip, a series of chips. Basically, the Tesla's path is to make their own computer chips rather than rely on something like NVIDIA or Intel or one of the other ones that does it. And they wanted to showcase that they had made all these advances. It's quite interesting to watch it. It goes on for a couple of hours. It's available on YouTube. I did watch it all the way to the end. But, it really is something only a nerd could really love, and I didn't understand. Three-quarters of it went over my head in terms of the computer technology that's involved. But what they're saying is if we can do a fully self-driving car, and he said we're getting pretty close to being able to do that, but the challenges are extremely high. There's all kinds of things that happen on the road and that sort of thing that are hard to program for. But we have to, for safety, we have to make sure we cover every possible incidents that could happen. And he wants to get more and more people to work for him. So it was basically a big jobs day, essentially is what it was. I think he had all of these really brilliant young engineers, all boys, no girls, and he was basically, they were saying, come and work with us, we've got this wonderful, and they demonstrated this. It was a series of chips. It wasn't just one chip. It was an artificial intelligence, basically a computer that would be able to run artificial intelligence. And I did see comments afterwards that nobody else has been able to do this. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But the point was, they feel that they're ahead, and they want to go further ahead, and they want to hire people. And when you think about it, if you were in that position, young and had some skill as a programmer or a computer engineer or all the different things that they want, that'd be a pretty exciting company to go and work for. As compared to going and work for GM or Ford or one of the other companies. So it was, and the other thing that it kind of highlighted, which I hadn't thought about before, was that if they can do this with cars, they could probably do this with other things, because the car application is actually one of the toughest of all the possible applications to use computer control. And they've already done it with SpaceX, where they can land the rocket that takes the payload up into space, have it come back and land on a platform in the ocean. So if they can do that, they can do a lot more. And then to cap it off, towards the end, he had what looked like a robot on the stage, but it really was a person doing a dance. It wasn't really a robot at all. But he said that it's going to be called Optimus, and they're going to actually build a real robot and come and work with us and help us build this robot. So it was a bit of a scam, but also a recruiting event. And they still haven't got the final fully self-driving program written. They keep sending out what they call beta versions of it, and people keep posting on Twitter that they drove from A to B without having to take over the control of the car at all. So it did everything. It did left turns. It did stop to stop lights, stopped at stop signs, followed the route without any human intervention at all. But it's not perfect. So, you get things like construction zones and stuff like that. And then the driver has to, of course, the driver has to be right there monitoring at all times, and it has to take over. So it'll probably be a while yet before they get the perfect version of it.
I remember the U.S. Army years ago tried to have a drone that was artificially driven to attack tanks, but instead of attacking tanks, it had a habit of shooting down telephone poles.
It looks like a telephone pole looks like a tank.
A tank gun, yeah.
Looks like a tank gun. Well, you know, we had a triathlon in Edmonton the weekend, and they had the F-18 jets fly over, which was kind of exciting. You know, they flew quite low over the river valley where the event was held, and I thought, you know, you look at that and you think that's really obsolete technology. You know, I'm sure that the drones are way ahead of that, and you know, those things cost $100 million each or more, $200 million each, and a really sophisticated drone probably is $1 or $2 million. So you can put lots more drones up, and they can do almost everything that those fighter jets can do. But they sure make a nice, exciting noise, and it's fun to watch them. It's like a entertaining thing, I guess.
Yeah, well, I believe the F-35 is probably going to be the last manned fighter jet. The next generation will be your Tesla-era artificial intelligence fighter jets,
yeah.
And they'll be taking out telephone poles.
Well, you know, they've had that capability for quite a while. The commercial airlines, they don't advertise it, but they can actually land the plane in bad weather without any intervention from the pilots, but they don't want people to think about that. But, you know, pretty soon I think people will realize that the humans are not as good as the computer, right? The computer is actually better than the human. And I think that maybe it'll be Tesla that demonstrates that. And of course, there'll be a lot of attention when the computer makes a mistake and kills somebody. But, the reality is humans make way more mistakes than computers, and so it'll be an improvement, substantial improvement. I think he said in the artificial intelligence day, Elon Musk said it's I think they're at the point where they say they're 200 to 300 times safer than humans. But he said we understand we have to be better than that. So
well, Skytrain in Vancouver since 1986 has been driven by computer only. I don't think they've had one train accident that they can trace back to the computer. The only crashes they've had have been in the switching yard when they've had people driving the trains.
Yeah, no, I mean, the reaction time, there's no reaction time with a computer. So if one of the things I've always thought they should do right now, if it's possible, is make all the trucks drive in the right lane, because they take up a lot of room on the highway when they get into the middle lane and the left lane, and then have them operated by computers so that they could be nose to tail. They don't need to be, because nobody wants to get in between trucks, right? So there's like 10 car lengths between trucks or 5 car lengths between trucks. The trucks could be like literally centimeters apart, and because the computer would react as soon as the truck in front of it slowed down a little bit, the computer would react immediately, whereas the human reaction it's something like 3/4 of a second. Well, that's why everything on the highway has to be so far apart, because the human, and that's assuming that the human's paying attention. If the human is distracted for some reason, then it's way longer than a second. So at that speed, quite a bit of ground is covered in a second, like a full car length or 2 car lengths. So that's why everybody has to be so far apart. Once you get computers judging the distance and controlling the speed of the vehicles.
Well, the vehicles also talk to each other.
They can talk to each other with 5G. They can. That's even faster. And so what it'll do is you can have all of these vehicles. I would start with trucks, but eventually you could do it with cars too. They would be running along. They could be running at a fairly decent speed, and they could be very, very close together.
In fact, I think in Nevada they're already experimenting with semi-trailer truck trains where you have 7 to 10 trucks where they really are nose to tail because they're talking to each other. So if the first one breaks, they all break. And there is a human in the last unit, and he's there to do things like fix tires if one of them has a flat.
Yeah, you could have a human in the first and the last. You could have it 20 trucks long, and it could go. But in Europe already they make the trucks stay in the right lane. It's so much better than in Alberta and BC where the trucks are passing each other. It's just a dangerous situation. But in Europe they all have to stay in the right lane, and if they ever pass, there's a huge fine that is levied if they get caught passing, because they don't want them to get in the way of on these autobahns where there's no speed limit. Some guy in his Mercedes is going 160 kilometers per hour, and a truck pulls out to pass. It's like, could be a disaster, right? So I think that makes a lot of sense, and have so it'll come faster. But the other thing is, it probably works better with electric trucks rather than diesel trucks. So there's a lot more computer power able to be packed into an electric vehicle than a diesel vehicle. So the two will probably come together. And there are definitely Tesla's coming out with a semi-truck, but BYD is also working on trucks. There's a Quebec company that's working on school buses. I don't know if they're working on trucks.
And I think Volvo said they're not going to produce diesel trucks anymore.
Volvo's got a huge truck division. Mercedes has got a big truck division. I think it'll happen more quickly than we expect. And it's a fairly easy, now you've got the problem of recharging, so that they may have to work with that, or, because the truck batteries will be much bigger, and so they'll take longer to charge, unless you have battery swap stations.
Well, what about just covering your semi-trailer with solar panels? Would that help?
No, it doesn't work, because I keep seeing those things. It's crazy, but no, there's not enough energy. It makes much more sense to have a ground-based recharging station and to stop once in a while. It's okay if the truck stops for a couple of hours every 8 or 9 hours. It's not the end of the world. And it's kind of neat when you push the button on Amazon and the package at 10 at night, and the package is delivered before noon the next day. But it actually isn't that important that it be there before noon. It could be there as long as it's there within a couple of days. It's probably not so bad, right? And that's so we can live with a little bit different. We're getting used to that now with all of the supply chain disruptions. We're getting used to things taking months to come. So that would allow for recharging batteries rather than having to keep the trucks running. And the trucks can't run 18 hours a day anyway with the human driver, because the driver has got a limit of 10 or 11 or 12 hours before the driver has to take a rest. So they could be charging up as long as they have drivers. And eventually, when they're run by robots, well, then of course now they could run 24 hours. Unless the tires need changing.
Yeah, well, from the research I've seen so far, these automated trucks run fine on interstate or interprovincial highways, but once you get into a city where you run into construction and traffic directing people, then a human still works best. But out on the open highway, there's no doubt the big rigs would probably be much more efficient.
Yeah, no, I think it's coming. Could come quickly. There are some forces that are not happy with the advent of that, and so they may try to slow it down. But I think it's inevitable. It would come, and within 10 years, kind of thing. One of the big things that we'd have to talk about another day would be the battery. The demand for batteries is going to be off the charts, and there's a lot of materials that the production of materials like nickel and lithium and all that has to be increased dramatically in order to meet the battery demand. And there's some new materials that in China, for example, they're working on a new battery that is called lithium iron phosphate, and they shorten that to LFP. And it's got a different chemical action, which means it doesn't catch fire as easily as the other batteries, and but it's got a shorter range. So that would change there's going to have to be, and Tesla is working really hard to secure some of these materials by making direct contracts with some of the suppliers, because there's probably going to be a shortage developed eventually.
Hilliard, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you. My
guest has been Hilliard MacBeth, author of the second edition of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. His website, MacBethMcLeodPartners.com. You can find him on Twitter at HMacB. If you have any questions for Hilliard or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@HowStreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at House Street. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.